Are you considering adopting a child? What a noble cause, but can be a lengthy process and an expensive process. How does the adoption tax credit work? I've got that and more coming up. My name's Mike Bernard, I'm the host of The Wise Money Show. I'm also one of the certified financial planners right here at Korhorn Financial Group. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and smash that thumbs up button. Thinking of adopting a child, that is just unbelievable. And we just had a team member here at KFG adopt a foster child that they've been caring for a long time. Cutest little guy out there. And we've got a few of our financial advisors right now are serving clients that are in the adoption process. And so this is a very technical, from a tax standpoint, the tax credit can be pretty technical, and there's some planning strategies around it. And so if this is you, if you've considered adopting or you're planning on it, make sure you're working with a certified financial planner, not because the finances need to drive it. No. That's not the primary reason at all. However, as I said, it can be a very lengthy process and can be extremely financially burdensome, right? It can be expensive. And therefore, understanding the federal tax credit and whether your state has a tax credit as well, and the planning nuances or planning opportunities that exist there, you're going to want to work with your CFP on that. So in this video, going to talk about we're going to do a flyover of the federal adoption tax credit rules and 5 rules and questions that are embedded within it. Let's get into it. So first question, or first thing you need to know is, how does the federal adoption tax credit work, and what expenses qualify? So the adoption tax credit is a tax credit that is there to help reimburse you for qualifying adoption credits. And so these expenses must be reasonable and necessary adoption credit. Thankfully, most costs that are or expenses directly associated with the adoption qualify. So most common agency fees, those can be expensive. Some attorney fees, of course, and court fees. Travel expenses, that even includes meals as well. A long time ago, had a friend that adopted from China, and so of course there were agency expenses, there were big travel expenses there as well, and that all qualifies. Other expenses directly related to the adoption, those qualify as well. But then some indirect expenses could qualify as well. In this example, installing a fence around a pool, something like that could qualify as well. So work with your certified financial planner who's also working with your CPA to see what expenses, what direct expenses related to the adoption actually do qualify and can work towards this credit. Next couple questions, things that you need to know. How much is the credit, and is there an income limit on it? Well, the tax credit for adoptions, it increases a little bit every single year. For 2023, that limit is $15,950, okay? And so that's the maximum adoption credit that you can get at the federal level. Many states also offer a small or relative to the federal credit, a state tax credit as well for adoption. So whichever state you're in, make sure that you are aware of that. Here in Indiana, there's a couple $1,000 tax credit there. So that's the amount. Is there an income limit where some of that gets phased out or is not eligible? Yes, there is. If your modified adjusted gross income is too high, then some of this tax credit, some of the credit begins to get phased out, and you're not eligible to use it. If your modified adjusted gross income is even higher, it exceeds the higher band of that phase out, then you're not eligible for any of it. And this is a challenge because, yes, adoptions are expensive, and therefore it really requires financial resources in order to pay for it. And yet, if you have too much resources, then you don't get the tax credit. And so therefore, again, doing some financial planning, if this is where your heart is, if this is what you're doing some financial planning to ensure that you're maximizing this and are planful for it, can really make a lot of sense and actually save you thousands of dollars here. So here are the income limits that apply for 2023. These change again every single year. So if your modified adjusted gross income as a family, married, filing jointly, is less than $239,000, then no problem. Then you'll get the maximum credit available again to offset the expenses that you incur. But it's got to be that top end of that phase out, that threshold. If your income's above that 239, by the time you get to 279,000, then you're completely phased out, and the entire child or adoption tax credit is not available to you. So within that $40,000 income range from 239,000 to 279,000, you get some of that tax credit, but it's phased out. Above 279, you don't get any of it. So make sure you're planning ahead and determining, well, what will my modified adjusted gross income be in this year? Do we make sure we maximize our pre-tax 401k contributions? Do we, max out our HSA contribution as well? What can we, do we make sure that we avoid realizing any capital gains and restructure some of the investments so we have less dividend income, those sorts of things. So doing that proactive planning to keep that modified adjusted gross income below those limits means that, makes a big deal. Okay, so when do you get the credit? When do you get the credit? When you incur the expenses, or when the adoption is finalized, if it actually is successful. We actually have some folks that we're serving right now that are going through the adoption process. It's taken 3 years. They've already been using some of the tax credit, and the adoption is not even final yet. So how do these rules work? So it depends on when the expenses are paid, whether it's a domestic adoption or foreign adoption, and then whether the adoption is finalized. So essentially, here's how it works. For a domestic adoption, so adopting a U.S. child, if it's a multi-year process, qualified adoption expenses, you can begin getting a credit for those the year after you incur them. So if you incurred expenses in 2022, you can take them as a tax credit for the adoption credit in 2023 if that adoption is still not finalized yet. If you incurred expenses last year and the adoption is finalized this year, then you can claim all of those expenses towards the tax credit this year. Now, that's domestic. If it's foreign, a foreign adoption is adopting a child that's not yet a citizen or resident of the United States, and all of the expenses, qualifying adoption expenses, you can claim towards the adoption in the year in which it's final. So slightly different rules on whether it's whether you're adopting a U.S. child or a non-U.S. child, and whether the adoption takes multiple years, which many of them do, and which year it's finalized. Now, with all that said, with such a big tax credit, $15,000, what happens if you don't use all of the credit? Well, this is an important distinction. Oftentimes we think a tax credit says, well, it'll wipe out the tax that I have and then it will refund, any unused credit will increase my refund. No, that's actually, this is not a refundable credit. So if you maximize this tax credit of $15,000, but when you calculate your tax bill, it's only $11,000, well then you'll only use up to $11,000 of this tax credit. Is the rest of the tax credit that isn't used, is that lost? Is it gone forever? No, you can actually carry forward that credit for up to 5 years moving forward. So here comes some planning opportunity. If you've got this tax credit, is there some other income that you'd want to make sure it applies to? Maybe doing a Roth conversion, maybe doing some capital gain appreciation or some capital gain realization. So here's the planning, right? So you don't want your modified adjusted gross income to be too high, otherwise you'll be limited and phased out in how much credit you're eligible for, but you don't want it to be too low where you don't have any income and therefore you're not using all of the tax credit that's available to you. So there's a brief flyover of the federal adoption tax credit, sort of 5 questions answered about it, but the big idea is, yes, financially, this can be it's a frustrating process, lengthy process, can be a expensive process as well. And yes, you're not doing it for the tax credit, but you want to be aware of how the tax credit works based on your situation so that you can optimize. Maybe it will influence some of your decisions, whether you do a Roth conversion or whether you contribute pre-tax or whatever your financial situation is, working with your certified financial planner, doing that creative tax planning and multi-year tax planning so that you optimize the tax credit, that is critical. Could mean the difference of thousands of dollars, which again, going through an adoption is a very, very meaningful amount. So work with your CFP on that. If you don't have a CFP on your team, contact one on my team. Find us online, Korhorn.com. That's Korhorn with K. WiseMoneyShow.com. You can find us there as well, or give us a call, 574-247-5898. All right, there you have it. Go out and take your next wise step in your financial life.